Hey everyone, welcome. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in for this interactive masterclass explainer today. We are doing something really fun and actually a little bit different this time around. We're going to totally test your knowledge on the life and times of the legendary Geoffrey Chaucer. You can think of this as a guided, interactive study session. We'll be going through 15 key questions that cover the whole shebang, from the massive historical shifts going on in the world at the time, all the way down to the juicy personal details of Chaucer's own life. By the end of this explainer, you are going to have a rock-solid grasp on the historical and social context that shaped literally one of literature's greatest figures. All right, so here is our syllabus for today. First up, context of a century. Second, plagues and uprisings. Third, the young merchant's son. And we'll wrap up with diplomacy and lasting legacy. Let's just dive right in. Section 1, context of a century. The 14th century world. Because, before we can really understand Chaucer the man, we absolutely have to set the historical stage. Okay, our first question is all about the timeline. What are the specific dates typically assigned to the age of Chaucer? Is it A, 1066 to 1340, B, 1340 to 1400, C, 1400 to 1557, or D, 1558 to 1625? The correct answer is B. We strictly define this era as that 60-year window between 1340 and 1400. It is a very specific chunk of time that basically changed the world, so keep those dates in the back of your mind as we move forward. Moving right along to question 2, we're looking at royal reigns. Chaucer was born during the reign of which English king? We've got Richard II, Henry IV, Edward III, or John. Well, if you guessed Edward III, you hit the nail on the head. Geoffrey Chaucer's arrival perfectly coincided with Edward's reign. Just think about how beautifully these timelines sync up. In 1327, the reign of Edward III kicks off. Then, just a little over a decade later, in 1340, Geoffrey Chaucer is born, and the age of Chaucer officially begins. And then, right at the turn of the century, in 1400, the age of Chaucer ends. It's almost like his life was custom-built to perfectly align with this specific royal era. So next question. Which monarch's reign is described as the midsummer of English chivalry? Once again, it's our guy, Edward III. His reign didn't just mark the time Chaucer was born. It actually represented the absolute highest development of medieval civilization. When you hear the word midsummer, think of an era that is at its brightest, most flourishing peak of English chivalry. Now for question 4. The famous military victories at Crécy and Poitiers were documented in the chronicles of which author? Was it Boccaccio, Froissart, Petrarch, or Wycliffe? The answer is B, Froissart. His chronicles brilliantly captured these historic battlefield wins, directly tying them into that incredible, soaring height of English chivalry we were just talking about. That brings us to Section 2, Plagues and Uprisings, the darker side of the 14th century. Because, well, let's be real, it wasn't all just glorious knights and fancy royal courts. We really need to contrast the high chivalry of Edward's court with the brutal, harsh realities that the common folk were facing every single day. Which leads right into question 8. What major health catastrophe absolutely ravaged the land during Chaucer's age? We have smallpox, the Black Death, also known as pestilence, cholera, or scurvy. Quite grimly, the correct answer is B, the Black Death. It hit with devastating force in the years 1348 and 1349. Remember our timeline? Chaucer would have been just a little kid when this absolute nightmare swept through. And naturally, with catastrophe comes serious social unrest. For question 5, which of these individuals was not a leader in the general rising of the common folk? Wat Tyler, Jack Straw, John Ball, or John Gower? The odd man out here is D, John Gower. The actual uprising was led by Tyler, Straw, and Ball. Gower was definitively not leading that charge. Next up, we touch on the massive religious shifts that were happening right alongside all these social uprisings. Who is known as the morning star of the Reformation? Is it Chaucer himself, William Langland, John Wycliffe, or John Barbour? The correct choice here is C, John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe actually earned this incredible title of the morning star of the Reformation. I mean, think about that metaphor for a second. A morning star is that very first brilliant light that breaks through the darkness just before dawn. It perfectly captures how deep religious upheaval was joining forces with the social uprisings and the plagues to make the 14th century a time of just immense, turbulent transformation. All right, moving to Section 3, The Young Merchant's Son, Chaucer's Early Life. Now that we've kind of painted a vivid picture of the chaotic world he was living in, let's zoom in on the personal beginnings of Geoffrey Chaucer himself. Let's test your knowledge of his origins with question 9. In which city was Geoffrey Chaucer born? Oxford, London, Stratford, or Cambridge? The answer is B, London. He was born around 1340, right in the bustling, crowded heart of the city.
But what about his family? Question 10 asks, what was the occupation of Chaucer's father? A parish priest, a merchant vintner, a knight of the shire, or a physician? He was a merchant vintner, which is basically a fancy way of saying he was a successful wine merchant. And this is key, right? Because it tells us Chaucer wasn't born into high nobility. He was born into a prosperous, working, middle-class merchant family.
So how exactly did a merchant's son end up rubbing elbows with royalty? For question 11, at age 17, what was Chaucer's first recorded court appointment? The answer is B. He became a page to the wife of the Duke of Clarence. This is a huge deal. It perfectly illustrates his early entry into the royal sphere, and it basically set the trajectory for his entire life. Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Diplomacy and Lasting Legacy, a worldly author. Let's explore how Chaucer's crazy international adventures directly impacted his enduring cultural legacy. Because he wasn't just some guy sitting in a dark room writing. He was truly a man of the world. Take question 12, for instance. What happened to Chaucer while he was with the English army in France in 1359? Was he knighted, taken prisoner, wounded by a dragon, or did he desert? In a super dramatic twist to his military career, the answer is B. He was taken prisoner. Obviously, he made it out okay to write his masterpieces, but talk about a stressful detour. Now, let's talk about the actual ideas that were shaping his mind. What was the new culture called that passed from Italy into England in the 14th century? It was B, humanism. This ideology is absolutely vital if you want to understand where he was getting his literary influences. And how did he bump into this new culture? Well, question 13 asks, Chaucer's diplomatic missions brought him into touch with the early Renaissance in which country? As we just hinted at, the answer is C, Italy. These diplomatic missions literally brought him face to face with Italian culture, as the Renaissance was just starting to bloom. In fact, while on those Italian missions, which two great Italian masters did Chaucer potentially meet? The answer is B, Petrarch and Boccaccio. Seriously. Think about the sheer magnitude of that for a second. The literal father of English literature just casually crossing paths with the absolute titans of the Italian Renaissance. It's mind-blowing. It's like a medieval supergroup.
And finally, we've reached our last question. Where is Chaucer buried? Geoffrey Chaucer was laid to rest in a part of Westminster Abbey that, incredibly, eventually became known specifically as Poets' Corner, absolutely cementing his eternal legacy in literature forever.
You know, just take a step back and think about the amazing journey we've mapped out today. We started at the midsummer of English chivalry under Edward III. We waded through the devastation of the Black Death and the intense uprisings of the common folk. We followed a young merchant's son into the royal courts, saw him get captured as a prisoner of war in France, and then watched him travel down to Italy, where he soaked up the humanism of the early Renaissance. Geoffrey Chaucer took a world that was entirely defined by plague, war, and massive social upheaval. And from those ashes, he used his own brilliant perspective to help build an entirely new literary culture. So I want to leave you with this final thought-provoking question. If a wine merchant's son from 14th century London can look at the absolute chaos of his times and build an eternal legacy out of it, what will your legacy be? Thank you so much for learning with me today. I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity to go out and dive even deeper into the magnificent age of Chaucer.